Hello, and welcome to the Sacred Sex for Real Women podcast for woo woo women in long term love who crave wow sex, deep connection, and radiant confidence. This podcast offers simple, soulful tools to bring sacred sex and feminine embodiment into your real life so you can feel turned on in your body, your marriage, and your day to day. I'm your host, Janine McKinnon, sensual embodiment coach, and I am joined by Carla Crivaro, love, relationship, and intimacy coach. And today we are talking all about masculinity and really loving and supporting the men in our lives. We have a lot of meat to get into. We'll be covering things around how to really support and inspire the men in our lives when it comes to when they're experiencing periods of shutdown, periods of stuckness, perhaps when they're dealing with some big life events, as well as sexual shutdown. So we have a lot to get into. I'm really excited for what's to unfold. Welcome to the podcast, Carla.
Thank you, Janine. I appreciate you having me here. I'm really excited to see what we're going to end up going into this evening. I know you've given like a direction of where we're going to go, but sometimes the conversations can lead us into places that we didn't expect as well.
Absolutely. And I loved seeing when we first connected a few months ago because we both have our Vita training, and just seeing the different content you have that's really uplifting and supporting men and masculinity, because I think there is so much conversation around toxic masculinity, and there can be quite the echo chamber that's very anti-men. So I love that you bring that other flavor, which really, really resonates with me. So it's nice to put that spin on things.
And I just want to say, like, the whole anti-man thing, just to give people a little bit of perspective, because people listening might be thinking, that she's always been, she referring to myself, she's one of those that's always been like, on the side of men. But actually in my late teens, early 20s, so I'm 44 now, I considered myself like an anti-man feminist. So I was reading a lot of feminist literature, which was showing things like, women have two X chromosomes, a man has an X and a Y, and the Y is half of an X chromosome, so that makes men like more deficient. And like I was really quite involved in that, while at the same time desperately seeking the validation of men. So there was this, difficult situation in my own life where, through my own wounds, my own woundings from, the men in my life growing up, and then also, having all of those impact how I viewed men and how I saw them and how I treated them. And then this deep desire to want to be chosen. And I think a lot of it for me as well was this unraveling and really starting to remove the objectification of men, because we always talk about the objectification of women. And when we say that, we're really clear that, objectification of women isn't just sexual. The word objectification is, making somebody else the other, an object. And, in society, we're very much aware of women being objectified, but actually a lot of women objectify men. And that was definitely the case for me. And what that looked like for me was, I didn't see them as human as me. Like I saw them as like, they didn't really have emotions. They were able to take, the insults and the what I considered banter and the unkind comments, the like little put downs and stuff, the sarcastic type of those sorts of comments, like, oh, they can take it because they're men and they don't have like the same emotional experience as I do. And so very, very much, like I said, that othering and that objectification. And a lot of it really sort of unraveled for me when I started to do my own inner work, and actually started then to notice, because I think when you start to see your own self-development, your own wounds, it then becomes a lot clearer on, oh, hang on a minute, that person that's behaving in that way, actually it's nothing to do with me. Because I've just behaved in this way because I'm feeling these emotions, it's bringing up rejection for me. And then you're able to start seeing how other people's, in inverted commas, bad behavior is also then coming back towards us. And it's like, actually, it's nothing to do with me, it's all to do with them. And it was like, well, if that's the case for women, maybe that's the case for men. Like, yeah. And so it's like, oh,
Hmm.
maybe, men really can feel quite deeply. And, because my husband at the time when a lot of this started, he was one of those people that was quite, what's the word? Like, he was very good at not showing emotion. And obviously, he didn't share emotion with me
Hmm.
because I wasn't really very safe to share emotion with. And so, this is part of the journey as well. It's like what I came to understand and realize was men in romantic relationships, or men that I was interested in dating, responded to me in a particular way based on how I was actually treating them unconsciously. Because I had this preconceived idea of who they were, how they were
Hmm.
behaving, you know, I then treated them in a way that then created that. So it became like a self-fulfilling prophecy, and I had created that for myself. And I had a woman reach out to me recently, actually, saying something along those lines, like she's been listening to my posts and some of the things that I write, and all of a sudden, like the pennies dropped, and she's just realised, oh, hang on a minute, what if it isn't men?
Hmm.
What if actually it's me? And I did a talk here in the
Hmm.
UK, in a city called Manchester. Every few months, there's a lady that runs something called the Sex Lectures, and they're like 12-minute talks. And I talked about my own personal journey from anti-man feminist to where I am today. Um, and yeah, it's that, and that journey in itself, and sharing that journey. And what I was going to say was, in the relation to where I am now, like all of that unraveling, all of that compassion, which I had to show for myself first to be able to show them for other people, has really led me to have like a deeper understanding of men. And then it was like, okay, you know, I don't have the male experience because obviously, I'm a woman. And so I went to do a year's training in sacred sexuality
Hmm.
for men to really deepen that. And being in that training, it wasn't just the information that we got given and, the training that we did to check our unhealthy, unconscious biases that we have, both men and women, around masculinity and what it means to be a man, but also just
Hmm.
listening to the men in the safe space that and container that was created, the other men doing the training, sharing about their own personal journeys and experience, which are actually really similar to women in the sense of how impacted they are by family,
Hmm.
by conditioning, by religion. We think that as women, we're the only ones feeling and experiencing that. And, when people talk about patriarchy, it just really became so clear that it's not a feminist issue. It's actually, men are really greatly affected by patriarchy as well. And I think the difficulties with the conversation is, if we're talking about men, then it's important to keep the discussion on men, because there'll probably be people listening right now and say, oh, you're talking about men struggling with the patriarchy, but what about women? And it's like having that understanding that just because we're talking about men and their difficulties doesn't take away from the difficulties that women have. Like, both are valid. And I think and if you can recognize that on a social scale, you
Hmm.
can actually bring it into your
Absolutely.
relationships as well. So it's a case of like, you know, as you'll know, Janine, when you're working
Hmm.
with women, and they bring in a problem or an issue that they're having in their relationship or in their sex life, it's understanding that there are two people both experiencing something different, and they're both valid in their experience. It's not about right or wrong. It's about, understanding what's happening and showing up for the two
Hmm.
individuals in that.
Yes, both can be true. And just because one is true, it doesn't invalidate the other. And I'm so glad you touched on patriarchy and the effect on men, because it's very well known the effect it's had on women. And that's absolutely, yes, that's a thing. We're not diminishing that in any way. And patriarchy has had a massive impact on men as well. That is way too often overlooked. Like, to me, that really is so much of those deep rooted reasons for some of this emotional shutdown, this disconnection, because they are not seen as safe or strong under patriarchy to have more emotions. And so that really is and plays a big role in these different struggles that so many men are experiencing today. And I love you sharing about your journey and how you haven't necessarily always had these feelings around men or this understanding around men, because it really is such a journey. And I resonated with different parts where for me, I was very like independent woman, like raised by generations of single
Mm.
moms. And it's like, we can do everything ourselves. We don't need no man. We can do it all. And I've also seen how these strong, strong women in my
And we're
life
not
have
supposed to
had
do it all
such
by
a hard
ourselves.
time
Mm.
doing it all themselves and not asking for help. No, we're not. And that's what I think is really beautiful as we can dive into these energetics around femininity and masculinity. And it's really recognizing our differences and the beauty in those differences, and then how we can come together in harmony because we are different. And that's what I think is really magical. And both sides are magical and amazing, not just our side. Like, obviously, our side is too. And not that it's necessarily sides, but it's just we all have those magical,
Yeah, I love
beautiful
that. When I
human
talk about like the
components within
energetics,
us with
I
these
like
different
to use yin and
flavors.
yang. The reason for that is because using the gendered terms, I find that like people get confused and
Hmm.
think that, oh, that means that women always have to be passive and they always have to be receptive and they can't be on the go. And so, like, I don't know how connected your audience are to energetics and the full understanding around polarity. But yeah, definitely, yin and yang, I feel, is like
Hmm.
easier terminology to use in that because it's the same thing, but just different language, and it enables people to do that. And the thing that you were describing there, like with the hyper
Hmm.
independence, it's those women that end up sort of pushing men away, trying to control a situation because of their own sense of, lack of safety that they feel within themselves. So they try and control the external, which, can often be men. And these women will find that they are attracted to men who are more in their yin energy. So the woman takes the yang energy. She's a lot more fiery. She's more of the leader. She takes control, and then the men tend to be
Hmm.
more in the yin. And what that can do for the relationship is you'll probably find yourself, Janine, working with women is, then sex just doesn't become interesting anymore, because who wants to have sex with somebody who feels more like your own child that you're mothering and managing than, somebody that feels like a partner, a collaborator, somebody that's showing up as
Yeah.
an equal. And by equal, I don't mean that you're the same, because like you said, the
Hmm.
beauty is men and women are different. And it's like, let's celebrate that. And let's, really see that
Hmm.
how biologically we're different, how wired differently we are, and how that's actually a benefit, because it's being different that we actually bring more to the table. Like, we can complement each other. And it's just, if you're able to accept and acknowledge those differences and meet each other in the middle, like that's where the real,
Hmm.
that's where the real juice lies.
Absolutely. And I thank you for that distinction with bringing in the yin and the yang energy, because that is such a great way of putting it without bringing in, as you said, kind of those different biases we can have around masculinity and femininity, because we all have different amounts of yin and yang. There's no right or wrong for what our particular flavor is. So, what would you say is that more healed, divine masculine or yang energy? What does it
Um,
look like
I don't tend
for
to
a
look at it
man
too
to be
much in
really
that way.
centered
So,
and grounded
because I
in
got
his
so
yang
when
energy?
I did a post recently on LinkedIn, it was about 2 months ago, and I wrote, who I work with. I talked about working with men and supporting them in coming back to their own sense of masculinity. And a guy replied below, like, "You're a woman. Who are you to teach a man how to be, masculine?" And the way that I see it is, it's not about teaching a man to be a man or a woman to be a woman, but it's about coming home to yourself. Like what? So it's meeting the individual man and finding out what masculinity means to him. So like I've done work with men, and like what masculinity means to them is so different. Like we as women, or society actually in general, we have this idea that a man is like somebody that like goes out and is like chopping wood and doing really, I don't even know what to call it other than manly, which is in itself like, judging it. And I was working with a guy, and I was inviting him to imagine him being in his most masculine self, and he was on a stage in a theatre here in the UK, dressed in Shakespearean gear, like doing theatre, and I was like, wow, that has also spoken to my biases around what masculinity means. And so it was working with that client, and at that point where I had to drop the idea of what masculinity means, because when you come home to yourself, it's going to be different. So, Janine, as a woman, you might identify more with like the more wild aspects of yourself. You might be a more sensual, slower, or you may feel more witchy. There'll be elements of those in you, but a specific archetype you'll identify with a little bit more than the next woman. And that's okay. And, this is the way that I see it for men as well. There'll be certain archetypes that feel truer and closer to them. And my role isn't to dictate what they should or shouldn't be doing, but bring them back to themselves. And then when it comes to the issue of things like the yang energy, it depends on what they need in their lives. So if they are in a relationship where they're getting heavily criticized, where they don't have good boundaries, then it's coming back to themselves on, connecting to that yang energy and being able to speak up for themselves, being able to lead a conversation or make decisions and feel true to who they are. Like, we have this idea that all men know what they want. And, my understanding is a lot of men sometimes don't actually know deep down what they want. They have ended up following a course of action because of what society has deemed them that they should be doing. Like, like all of us, you go to school, then you further education, you find a career, at some point you meet somebody, get engaged, buy a house, get married, have children. Like there's this set way of moving through life. And so we don't actually tune into what we want. And so a lot of that is actually coming home to that. And I'm sure with the women that you work with, you'll be thinking, yeah, this is exactly the same, that women are like trying to undo the things that society has told them that they need to be or that they should be.
It brings it back to that parallel between women and men, because it's very similar expectations, right? When we think about that list of going to school, starting your career, finding a partner, getting married, getting the house, like there's two people involved in that. That's not just the female experience. It really is the expectations placed on most people. That's just the journey we're expected to go through. And so it doesn't just have the impacts on us. And often with the women I work with, it's a lot of that good girl archetype that they're learning to peel back those layers of and come back to their truth. Likewise, with what you just shared, a lot of that is living up to expectations, being the yes man or the good guy and doing those things that they're supposed to do. And then is this
and just as you were talking, something that came up for me as well was,
so I really love how
even though all of that is true, there are also the biological elements which do make us different. So it does mean that sometimes men are going to do things that we don't understand as women, partially because they've been socialized differently, partially because biologically, hormonally, they are different, they're motivated differently. And with anybody and everybody, it's I think everybody is always behaving from the best intention that they can. It's just there's something else sometimes that can get in the way, whether it's miscommunication, maybe a pattern, trauma, wounding, whatever it might be. But I think that, for most people, for most of us, we are behaving from good intentions, even when we aren't behaving from good intentions. The reason that we're doing something is for ourselves, to protect ourselves in some way. And so I think it's also a point of like having compassion for somebody else and how they show up, but at the same time, while having that compassion, being really clear on how we want to be treated and how we want to be spoken to, and also staying true to that as well.
Absolutely. Those boundaries are so important in any and all relationships. And I'm really reminded of one of my biggest takeaways in reading The Queen's Code by Alison Armstrong. Such a good book, and so many things as you're speaking. I'm like, yep, thinking of this and this. But one of my personal biggest takeaways, and it seems so simple when you say it, but it's just really seeing my husband as always having the best intentions. And it's like, obviously that's the case. Obviously he's just wanting to put his best stuff forward and be that way for myself and our kids. But I think previously to that, and reading it and having it come so clear, was like, oh, like he's a hairy woman kind of thing. Like he's not thinking right for this particular situation. Like, oh, you're not thinking like that, or that's wrong. And it's like, no, that's his experience. Like, oh, he's trying to help. He's not thinking I'm dumb, trying to support me with directions with the road, which used to be a really big battle. He's just trying to be like, hey, heads up, here's this thing coming up. And I would internalize it. I would think that he's saying that because of me being dumb or not capable, when that's not his thing at all. So I think that can be a really big turning point when we can anchor ourselves in that generally the people in our lives, when we're being
And
intentional
it's
about who we're
interesting as well,
surrounding
the
ourselves with,
example that you
they
use
have the
there,
best intentions. They're trying to
because a
put their
lot of
best self
women,
forward. And
I
so
think,
bringing that compassion into
misunderstand when men are
those
trying to help
different
out.
experiences we
And,
have
and
together.
because that term mansplaining, so as you were speaking, that came to mind, because there would be women sat there going, your husband's mansplaining. And yes, there is a certain element of that. And I'm not saying that every man isn't doing mansplaining. There will be men that do that. But the vast majority of them, because if you listen, they also do it with other men. Like if you slow down and pay attention, men will, like if you share something as a woman, and then the guy goes and then does it, and he does it as though it was his thing, or he'll give you information or correct you around something. But men will do that with other men. They don't just do it with women. So if you sit back enough, you can actually see it happening. And one of the great places to see this is in work. If when a man is really sure or convinced by something, it doesn't matter who you are. He's that's his point of view. And this really, really helped me in my relationship with my dad, who, is so opinionated. In fact, as am I. That's probably where I got it from. But he's so opinionated, and in the past I would just find it really frustrating and like mansplaining. And then actually I would see him do the same thing with my brother, do the same thing with my kid's dad. And so it's like, actually take a step back. What am I making it mean about me? What part of it is it speaking to me? And it isn't actually about me at all.
Yeah, and again, I'm reminded about your journey that you shared with kind of these shifts around masculinity. Is it's a lot of it's her own healing journey. A lot of it is taking those steps back to see things through that wider lens.
Yeah,
It's
and
like,
as you're
oh,
talking,
okay,
and
this hits a
you
little
saying
bit
about my own
different.
experience,
It's
something that
not just
literally just
about
popped
me
into my mind
and my
was, a
projections
really big
of
mistake that a
men
lot
and
of
how
us
they're
women
treating me or
make is
acting, and how
not
much am
seeing
I
the
playing
men
a
in
role
our
in that?
lives giving us the love that that they are giving. Like, so something that I see really often is like women become so fixated on he needs to show me his love like this, and it needs to be done in exactly this way, and if he doesn't, it means he doesn't care. And we
Mm-hmm.
actually miss out on the opportunities to really see how the men in our lives really want the best for us and how much they really care. Like, and so I did a women's circle at the weekend around non-monogamy, and I was having the same conversation with the women there. With, a lot of women just don't understand
Mm-hmm.
how special it is for men to be in spaces with women, and how much they enjoy just being around women, and how much that they want to show up for women. Because if you're open and receptive, if you walk down the road, through the supermarket, and you ask a man to help you with anything, he is so keen to be able to do that for you. Like, so keen. If you're struggling with something,
Mm-hmm.
carrying a bag, like if a man asks you to carry that bag, you say yes, and that will brighten up his day. Like, absolutely. Yeah, they really want to do that. And so many women put up these walls. And so my own story that I have around that, I had last year I was having quite a difficult relationship with my dad. I was in a relationship for a couple of years, because I was married for 16 years, 11 years, and in a relationship for 16 with my kid's dad, and then I left it and was in a relationship for 2.5 years. And so towards the end of that relationship, it was bringing up the my father wounds, because my ex was bringing up all of the stuff, all of the unmet inner child needs that my little girl had within inside me, and that was then affecting my relationship with my dad, because I was getting triggered by my ex, and then how I was speaking to and responding to my dad was very much in the way that I used to when I was a little girl. And so I found myself in this pattern. And towards the end of last year, I realized what I was doing, and I took my dad for a walk. I was like, can we go and have a chat? And he was like, okay. And so I apologized, and I said to him, I like how I had been treating him, and it wasn't right, and I took all of this responsibility and everything. And my dad's of a certain generation, he's in his 70s. He hasn't done any self-development work whatsoever. Never, doesn't believe in counselling or therapy or anything like that, and can't understand why people would come to me for support around their problems regarding sex.
Mm-hmm.
And so so he was sharing, how upset he was, and
Mm-hmm.
and then he started sharing different bits of his life as well, generally. And I just let him talk, and I listened, and I asked questions, and I was really, really curious, and I held space. And I bit my tongue, because he said a few things which were like, yeah, but you're the adult, you're the older one, you're the parent, you should be, all of those things. I just held my tongue, and holding my tongue obviously meant that at the end of it, he felt like he'd had the opportunity to share everything that he felt like he needed to share. And so I left him at his house, went home, and it had been raining that night. So when I got home about an hour later, I got a text message from my dad on WhatsApp, and he was, how was the walk? He said to me, and I was like, I replied something along the lines of, it was really good to hear the things that are challenging you at the moment, the things that, bring you joy. I just really want a better relationship with you, Dad. So, I put my heart out on the line, and shared all of that. And, there was a part of me waiting for him to say something similar, because I asked him the question, how was the walk for you? And so I was hoping, something like, thank you for asking me to come for a walk, Carla. It meant a lot. Or, I appreciate you taking the initiative to do that. I really care about you. Like, I was hoping for something like that. And so when I asked him, how did you find the walk? His reply was wet, referring to the fact that it had been raining. And my initial reaction was like, oh, yeah. Oh my God, how can you not see what I'm doing? Do you not notice like I'm trying really hard? You don't acknowledge me for it. And all of those things. And I was about to reply when all of a sudden I just realized his initial reaching out to me, how was the walk, was his way of showing me that actually he cares. And that was his thank you. He doesn't have the ability to say thank you in that way, in the way that I would like. But him reaching out, he must have gone home, thought about the conversation, was thinking about me, and reached out, to say that. And so the reply that I sent back to him was the laughing emoticon, because that's the reaction that he wanted back. So yeah, and it's just like, how often are the men in your life actually reaching out to you, but you're not seeing it?
I've got like goosebumps and like little tears. That is a beautiful story, and I think one that most of us can relate to in different ways. And I even had a very similar conversation yesterday. I've been training for my Reiki level 2 the last couple of days, and so it's been really nice sitting with other women talking about all of these different things. And one thing that came up is it really is this beautiful turning point when we can see others for the way that they give love without the expectation of they should be giving love to us in this way. And if it's not this way, I don't feel loved. And being able to, again, take that step back and really see the ways that they show their love. And for my personal story, I can remember in the earlier days of my marriage and motherhood, those like Instagram comparison traps we can find ourselves into sometimes, right? And seeing different women and moms sharing like, oh, my husband came home and surprised me with these flowers, or like set up this big date night, or this, that, and the other thing. Amazing. That's working for you. That's great. That's not necessarily my husband, which is absolutely fine. But in those moments, I'd get triggered and be like, oh, he doesn't do this for me, doesn't care about me. And in being able to take that step back and really realize he brings me feathers that he sees when he's out at a job, or sends me a picture of the view he can see, or he'll point out different repeated numbers, or just different things like that, where it's showing he's thinking about me all throughout the day. And it's like, hey, I love you. You're on my mind. I thought you would like this. And so being able to see that just strengthens that love even more, being able to receive it and see that in a different way. He's not wrong in any way. And he is showing his love all day, every day. I just needed to take the step back to see it. And also with your story, I think you answered one of those questions that I wanted to cover, is how can we help support our partners, or how can we navigate those situations when they're feeling emotionally shut down, where we're wanting to talk to them about these things and we're experiencing that shutdown. And I think you covered so much of it with your conversation with your dad, letting him talk, asking questions,
Yeah, Alison Armstrong, because you
biting
mentioned her
your
before, she
tongue,
says like the 30-second rule,
not
like count
coming
to 30.
in to
And most of the
answer
time, you don't even need
correct,
to
and
get
just
that far
giving that
anyway. But
space
yeah, because
and
as women,
really
what we're doing when we're talking
listening
is we're always sort of
until he does come to that
responding
complete,
immediately
not
in the
coming in
moment, and
partway
men don't
through and talking
necessarily
about
do that. They do require a little bit more thought, especially
it.
when I'm thinking about my clients as well.
Yeah.
My male clients, when I'm working with couples and stuff as well, it's like
Mhm.
encouraging the women to give the men that little bit more space. And also going back to the example that you were sharing as well around with regards to things like gifts, there'll be women listening that it's really important for them to receive something or do something and it be a particular way. And if it is so important and you do really need that, then set the man up to win. So don't be like hinting at things. It's real clarity around, hey, because this is with my ex-husband. This was something that I did with him. So I sat down with him, and because gifts is my love language and it's not his. And so what I did is I sat down with him and I said, like, because he hadn't got me anything for my 40th birthday and he hadn't organised anything or done anything. And it was just like, for me, it was the last straw. And I didn't react in the best way on the day. I threw some oranges across the kitchen. But, once I calmed down a couple of days later, I sat down and, I said to him, this is really important to me. In the future, moving forward, this is what I want. And I got really, really clear on, I want him to, from now on, to organise anniversaries, that it's not for me. That includes like everything related to the anniversary. So I was really clear on, you're organising the childcare. You're the one finding things. You're the one making sure that you need to get the time off work, all of the logistics and everything. You're the one that needs to do that. And then, what my expectations were for my birthday. My mum used to be a florist, so supermarket flowers just were not the thing. And if you like, I don't mind if you get me supermarket flowers on the way home from somewhere. But like, if it's for my birthday or something like that, then they need to be proper flowers. And I sat down and had that conversation with him, and he was able to meet every need after that. Like he did it, and he did it well. He didn't do it as perfectly as as I would probably would have liked. Like you said, you see the things on Instagram and all of that, but he did it really, really well because his desire was to please me. When I sat down and I said how hurtful it was for me to not get anything. But then also took it in my own hands and set him up to win for the future. Because, and also if they do make a mistake, it's like giving them grace to make the mistake as well. So if they don't get the thing right, I mean, he did get the stuff right with regards to finding childcare and all of that. But if he had made a mistake, rather than like, oh, I can't trust you to do anything and get it right, that would have shut him down and meant more likely in the future that he's not going to want to do it. Because he got to that point in a lot of areas of our relationship, because I was constantly, it needs to be done like this. Can you go and do this job in the house and do it like this and do it like that? And one thing that I came to really understand very, very well, and something that I always share with my couples when I'm supporting the woman individually in when I'm working with couples, is like, men are really good problem solvers, like really, really good. And so the mistake that a lot of women make is they'll go to their partner, and they'll not tell them what the problem is, but they'll just tell them what they want them to do. So, and I'll give you an example of something that I did. So we had a cleaner coming in once a week, but in between, because we have 2 children and a cat, in between, the floor just ended up being gross, and it was really stressing me out. Now, what most women would have done, and what I probably would have done, a few years before that, is I would have gone to him and said, hey, I can't cope with everything. Can you vacuum? At which point, he's not going to remember because it's not his priority. He's not going to think about it. He'll forget. Then if he does it, he probably won't do it in the way that I wanted. And all of the different things, which then would have made me more frustrated because he's not doing it. He didn't even notice it in the first place. He's not using his initiative and all the things. I would have got angry and upset and everything. Instead, what I did, I went up to him and I said, hey, I can't cope with the floor in between Caroline. That was the cleaner's name. In between Caroline come in. What do you suggest? And he went away.
Mhm. Ah, that solves that same issue in my marriage. Mhm, mhm, mhm. Yeah. Mhm, 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 mhm. I had no idea. Mm, mm, mhm, mhm. And it really goes to show that when it's not done our way, it doesn't mean it's not done right. And giving them the space to figure it out because they are, as you said, amazing problem solvers. And when it can just be like, I have that problem. Can you please help me? They're like, oh, yeah, I'll come in. Let me help. Let's figure this out. And learning that and being able to navigate that together, I think it just really brings you closer and closer because you're able to, like, I have these issues instead of it building this quiet resentment and frustration that's ongoing. It's just right away, I have this problem. All right, let's solve it. And showing appreciation, showing like, oh, it feels so much better. Like, wow, the clothes are clean and dry and it's supper time. This is amazing. Like, I'm so much less frustrated than I was before. And being able to pump each other up in that. And I find it really helps build that momentum. And I was reminded of situation in my marriage where it really came down to providing those clear instructions as well. Because I think that's something we set ourselves up for failure often is just, oh, he should know. Oh, he should be able to read my mind. I drop these hints. He should know. And it's no, they're different. They're it's totally different person. And you can set each other up for success by being very clear on what your desires are, like for your birthday. And for me, it was around Christmas time and stockings. And my side of it is I put so much thought and care and love into all of our family holiday things. And my stocking is the one piece where that's his role to do that for me. And I tend to do most of the other side of it, of course, with input, but like that one piece was for him. But I wasn't very clear about it. super disappointed one year and had a big frustrating talk. Next year comes around, I go through it and I'm so disappointed. It was like shaving things and toothbrushes and all this stuff. And I was so upset, like, had this big fight around it. Little did I know how hard he tried that year for my stocking, looking at all of the things I use, getting the right brands of these things. Like, he had tried so hard, and I had no idea. And so he's like, "What's going on? I try so hard. You can't even appreciate me in that. Like, this isn't good." And so being able to work through that and what I actually clearly meant when it came to what I would love to see inside that, the next year, nailed it, rocked it out of the park, and every year since. And so when it comes to these things, we can think they know even when we say something, but they're a totally different person, think totally differently. So being very, very clear each step of the way and also opening it for them to problem solve when the time is right. Just it sets both of you up for success. I don't think it's hand holding, which I think is sometimes portrayed as like they should know I'm not going to hold their hand. And it's like, no, if you're both going to end up disappointed, like, why would you bother do that? If you're excited about your anniversary coming up and you want an amazing night together, talk about it together. Talk about how excited you are. What plans are we going to have? And then you're both so much happier. Yes. Hmm. Mm. Mhm. Mhm. What does that mean? Mhm. Mm. Mhm. Mm. Mhm. Ah. Mhm. Yeah, it doesn't have to be a job or a chore. We get to make it fun. It gets to be however we want it to be. And I love your example with incorporating it in the sexy talk. There's so many different ways that we can approach these things. And I also really appreciate that you brought up that part around how we can thrive with criticism and use it as motivation to like be introspective and change it and try and do better. where men are often not like that at all. That's where that shutdown piece comes, is from that criticism. And so I often share with clients, when there's that sexual frustration, not necessarily getting what you want, instead of opening up the conversations around, I don't like this, and this, just start by affirming what is good. And that tends to open them up even more. Oh, I really love it when you touch me in this way. Or, oh, you gave me so much time to warm up when you were doing this. I felt so ready this time. And the more we're able to reaffirm, then they know what you like. They do more and more of what you like. And then it builds that kind of comfort bubble. And if there are still some of those things hanging around, I find they're more open to have conversations, again, bringing in that roadmap of what to do instead, what you like, and focusing on that part rather than the doing wrong part. Mhm. 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 Later. Yes, I get my points. Yeah, I've loved playing around with all of these things with my son, as well as moving through the Queen's Code, and with really giving them that chance. Oh, can you help me? And thank you. I think that's part of our feminine magic, is bringing in that feeling side for them. And it, like, you doing this made me feel this way. And then they're like, oh, yeah, I'm the superhero. Like, and I want to keep feeling this way and making her feel this way. And so, again, you get that momentum together. And I'll hear kind of that other side where it's like, I don't need to thank them for taking out the trash. That's an expectation. They shouldn't have the appreciation for that. Well, you know what? I really love when it's recognized how clean the kitchen is when he comes home. And even though that might just be the norm, it makes me feel good. So I'm sure as heck going to make him feel good. And then we just each get to appreciate each other all the time instead of having that complete lack of that. Like, for me, it's so clear, rather than not bothering because it's the expectation. How about we both just flourish in this appreciation and love for each other for the small things and the big things? Mhm. 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 Yeah. Mhm. 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 Yes, it's kinda going from that shift of feeling like you're on your own islands in this on your own and feeling resentful of the other to really coming together as that team, and when something inevitably comes up, you've both poured into this team, that I also feel like there's this shift of, like, "Let's work through this problem together," rather than on the own, you versus the other mentality. It's that togetherness. And I did want to touch on that one last point that I had mentioned at the beginning is supporting them in kind of those stuck phases. I think we've covered lots of bits and pieces, but to just really name that, something I've seen with some clients recently is big things going on in life, whether it's job losses, job changes, or big family losses, and the women feeling like their male partner is just in this stuck phase. And so, how best to support them in that? I think we've touched on lots of pieces, showing that appreciation for who they are rather than why don't you do this? Shouldn't you go out and try this? But I would just love to hear your thoughts on that. Mhm. 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 Yeah. Mhm. Mm. Mhm. Yeah. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Mhm. 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 Again, it really comes to setting both of you up for success and understanding how each other works. And you know that talking while they're in the middle of something, when they're coming home or when they're seemingly not doing anything, but they're in a game or tinkering away or whatever it might be, that's not the time. And it could be the time of, hey, I want to talk to you about X, Y, and Z. Do you think we could do that at this time? And then that's it, and giving it that space. And I like that you brought attention to we as women can fix in conversations too, because I think that's a really shared annoyance that many women will have with their male partners is whenever I'm talking about things he's wanting to fix, I just want him to listen. And again, with that stepping back, we totally do that too. We really do. So being able to just give that space and to create that safe container for him. Like you said, not necessarily bringing things up days later, or if he's not ready to talk, not flipping out about that. Would you feel safe talking to someone who's just flipped out on you before you even shared anything? Do you think you want to be more vulnerable with someone? Probably not. So again, kind of putting ourselves in their shoes can be helpful too, while also understanding how they operate and just giving them the space, listening, resonating with them, asking what they need. And that can really help those things grow and get out of those more stuck, disconnected patterns. Thanks. I feel like we could go on and on and on. It has been such a pleasure chatting with you about all of these things with men and our relationships, but we do need to wind things down. I'm wondering if you have any last messages that you would like to share for those listening who tend to be those women with the male partners and long term relationships and just really wanting to see the men in their lives thrive. Mhm. Mhm. That's a juicy one. And going back to the self development, I've thought about a few times in our conversation. I feel like for me, how I've been able to develop and come into myself and my femininity has been working through my masculine wounds and my father wounds. So being able to do that practice, I've done it myself. It is powerful. Mhm. 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 Absolutely. The social conditioning and from our family, and there's all these different layers that have packed on over decades. And so it takes time to peel these back. Going through that journaling process helps so much on the logical side. And then we can continue to follow our journey and begin to work on more of the unconscious side of things as well. So, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to everyone listening. For those that are like, Carla sounds so interesting, I'd love to connect with her more. Where can they find you? I know you have lots of great blog content. How would you like people to connect with you? Mm. Mm. Wonderful. Thank you. I will make sure those are listed in the show notes for those listening. So, thank you again, Carla, for being here. Thank you again to those listening. If this episode was impactful, please make sure that you are following or subscribe so you get new episodes every Tuesday. And if you feel like leaving a rating or a review, it really makes a big impact on getting this podcast out there to more women just like you who can use messages like these. So, wishing you a love and pleasure filled week, and I will be back next Tuesday.